Hello, welcome over everyone. This is Brandon Ahmad coming to you today to come answer a very interesting question. What about exam MB500 Finance and Operations Apps Developer? Now, for most of you who are brand new to Microsoft, let me tell you what this exam is. This is your X++ intermediate exam that basically states that you can develop in Dynamics 365 and that you have an understanding of the core principles that Microsoft has designated as consistent within the skill set. This exam's pretty highly requested. It's one of the ones that's very, very popular. And a lot of times there's a lot of questions about what the exam covers and what it doesn't cover. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to answer some common questions about the exam and some things and give you some tips on how to study for it and get ready. I'll tell you what it does and what it doesn't do, little mistakes to make, couple things like that, and also kind of go over the topics, what they mean. Talk about the how does it apply to the real world, and address that also. And then I'll also go ahead and make sure that you get a pretty good understanding. Now, many of you may know I'm a Microsoft certified trainer also, not just a consultant. Even though if you look at the blog, you'll always see me out there like programming and going on sites, okay? That's the big job, but this is sometimes as I call it, my night job, which is teaching. And I've actually even set up my own minor training center. But I'm also an official regional lead for Microsoft. That is a volunteer position where you are selected by Microsoft to be an interface in the community between Microsoft's relevant learning department and between the community. So I do a lot of activities. I spend an extensive amount of time with Microsoft Learning. I follow many of the Microsoft Learning events, and it's really, really a big pleasure because I actually have input into the educational curriculum, and that's a tremendous value. Now, in my role, I want to go out to the community now, and I want to go ahead and talk about how to prepare for this exam and just some of the important points. So let's go ahead and start right now, and I'm going to bring up the screen, and we'll start talking about it here, okay? So basically, okay, you are a developer in Dynamics. And you guys can see what I've done is you always start with the Microsoft exam first by looking at the skills measured. Microsoft is actually extremely good about ensuring that, or at least they try to be, as clear as they can on their exams. Now, they don't give away exam questions. Contrary to popular belief, there is nowhere where Microsoft will disclose their exam questions, including to the writers of the exam themselves. The process is protected to keep up the integrity and things like that. So that's the first thing. But what they do is they do give you the topics that are generally covered and the topics that one should know in order to be able to pass the exam. So they tell you first that these are the candidates. And if you start out, you'll go on the Microsoft site. So let me just do this real quick. And you'll start with, let me just go ahead and pull this up. You'll get exam MB500. And you'll go on to, say Google or something like that. Let's just put in one real quick. And let me bring one over. Let me just bring over a Google here. There's Google. And there it is right there. So you'll see right over there, there's exam MB500, Microsoft Dynamics 365 Finance and Apps Developer. And you'll see where Microsoft really goes through and makes things very, very clear, including where to go to be able to relate or to be able to register. What are the related parts of the exam? Who are the candidates? For example, the candidates are going to be developers, right, with finance and operations. Typically, they used to say about 3 to 5 years, but now Microsoft doesn't provide any guidance on that. But it used to be there. One of the changes Microsoft Learning is going through. Typically, they're going to go ahead and test, very importantly, X++, but also some additional things too. And we'll get into that in just a moment. And then they're going to talk about things like, what are the things that you would typically be doing in your day-to-day, right? Migration, integration, implementation. I'd have to say, I'm barred from saying specific questions on the exam. Anyone is who's taken one. That's a condition. But I will say that I do believe that they do a very good job of covering a number of real topics in this particular one. Now, some things they look for, and these are things that you look for inside of a Dynamics 365, finance and I guess now it's called supply chain, but still you get the point. Skill set. It's actually called Dynamics 365 Finance, Dynamics 365 Supply Chain, but still, things you look for are you look for that developer to have, Visual Studio, Azure DevOps, LCS, and SQL Server Management Studio. That's a pretty fundamental that's pretty fundamental, definitely. I'd also look for Azure administration. Also, but I guess in LCS you can make an argument that that's actually integrated. And I'd like a couple other things too. But then you see some other things too, like for example, you can run Windows PowerShell, T-SQL. You've got object-oriented programming languages. That's going to be extremely helpful. That's pretty much what you would look for inside of a Dynamics developer. Now, from there you can come in and you can actually schedule the exam. Now you can take the exam online. And then you see these skills to deliver. Now, Microsoft tells you how they generally weight, or at least what percentage of the questions and whatever else. They don't tell you how they actually score the exam. That's different. So contrary to popular myth, a 60 or 70% is not passing like college. Instead, Microsoft goes through a weighted system that they keep confidential, and that's what they use at the very, very end. We don't actually know that, although we all know it's a bell curve of some sort, but that's actually kept highly, highly confidential for a lot of good reasons. And then they've got an exam skills. Now on the skills, I want to go ahead and discuss that, but let me go to something first real quick. There's two ways to prepare: online for free and then instructor-led. And Microsoft really made a big commitment in Dynamics, just the overall family, to training people. And so you see they've got some very good modules over here to be able to start out with. Like you can see this module 1 through 8. Years ago, this was not there. When I say years ago, I mean like 2 years ago. When they really began to first start with this, it was quite a surprise. It's actually a lot different. And so you see right here, you can see that they give you these timers, these sections, and just they get you started on developing if you're brand new, just becoming familiar. This could save a lot of time just even at a high level for a developer to onboard. One of the things is I have a small learning partner that I basically founded, and we also do consulting, a lot of niche Dynamics consulting. And when I have to start developers out, in Dynamics, sometimes I'll bring in developers who might have a strong .NET skill set or Android skill set or device skill set, maybe for integrating with barcodes, things like that. And when I start training them, I will oftentimes start them right here, just on reading this, just to get a general introduction of the product. It's not a bad part. I don't consider it enough for the certifications. I don't consider it enough to work. And the reason why personally, and let me just say this, it's got nothing to do with the quality. I think the quality is good. I think this is extremely good for the quality in terms of online courseware. I think for me, this is how I personally feel. So let me stop real quick and turn on the camera. So you've got this online free training and it's great. It's really, really great actually. I mean, I've never seen Microsoft really go to this extent for the Dynamics line. We've seen it before in other lines, but not in Dynamics. Okay, and then you've also got instructor-led training, and you can go ahead and choose, from any Microsoft certified partners. And by the way, I'm also a certified partner, but in full disclosure, but everyone knows that. In fact, mine's a little bit different because it developed about 40% I use the custom training classes personally whenever I teach, but I also have about 40% of additional material and far more hands-on labs. I think the advantage is if you can set up the labs yourself and do them, you can learn it from the documentation. You can. Microsoft makes it that way. If you need things that speed it up, like if you need an instructor explaining it, if you need someone to put context in so that you get it a lot faster, if you need the interaction, and depending upon how you like it, like for example, is your training center going to specialize in Dynamics? Some of them do. Mine does, for example, and other ones do too that are very good. And do you need someone that's going to, and do you need something that's going to give you, that live experience or that remote experience? So those are some of the core parts. Instructor-led you can click on, and Microsoft will then give you, if you notice, if you click on this, they'll give you a list of silver partners that are next to your area that you could possibly use for this. Now, before you take the course though, you got to make sure, if you're going to take an instructor, make sure that they've got labs as absolutely important. Make sure that licenses are covered. That's extremely important. Licenses can add up to a lot of money real quick and lead to problems. And usually I would ask for a review of the labs or a review of a lesson. And you guys will notice that I've been very proactive about posting a lesson on mine, for example, to sort of set that framework so that, people don't just waste their money on Dynamics. Now, if you need an instructor, that's great. They're going to take care of all that. Just like if you go on, my site or you go to some of the other ones, you'll see where that's all there. And Microsoft does release an outline. My outline is different because I've added a bunch of extra material, but they do release that. Now, coming up, if you're going to go inside of the exam, something to remember here is going to be the skills outline. So let's talk about that for just a moment, and then let's make sure that we understand what the skills outline does for us. So coming back over here, you guys can see that these are our core skills right here. And inside of our core skills, we come down and we start to see these are the percentages. Now, first thing is architecture and solution design. In my opinion, this is not enough in the real world just yet, but it is a good start. It at least ensures the fundamentals like packages, projects, models, elements. Other things I would have liked to see that I know that I've added onto the course are things like, for example, models, deployment, how to be able to use the build tools, how to be able to do things like that. Those things are equally as important to me for today's developer. And understanding how to set up your models is very, very important, but still very good for the basic part. It's easy to nit and pick after something's already developed. What about designing and implementing a user interface? Well, very important. A lot of user interface things like that, workspace navigations. I would have liked to see more patterns, a few more things like that would have been covered. But I do think they do a pretty good job of just talking about some of the general overall, insurance of being able to develop. If you're doing application lifecycle management, overlayered and extensions, you guys will notice it's overlayered, but notice that the exams change. The exams are always changing, and this is probably one of the hardest parts of having any course. I'll tell you right now, a significant percentage of things change in this business, okay? In IT in general, but in software. There are labs that I built 6 months ago that after some updates quit working. That can happen because you've got dependencies on Azure, dependencies on all kinds of things, and they go through updates just like software does. So something to keep in mind, the exam is not a static process by any means. They are always updating it. Now for implementation lifecycle management, it's looking for basic LCS, things like that. That's something that's very important. And I know that on mine, in my customized one, I actually have people go through and actually set up LCS. Like we've got a little LCS test tenant for them, and we have them go in and go actually set up projects, do things like that, because it is extremely important, definitely. Now for developer tools. So when we talk about the developer tools, what we're looking at is we're looking at the things that you use to develop. And I know that I've published a custom demonstration where I showed some customizations where I added some things on the developer tools, but basically it does do a pretty good job of ensuring that you have the core base fundamentals to do it. Is it enough to be able to carry out the job just yet? I'm not sure. I don't know if I could say that all the way. I think with add-ons it's enough. I think the teaching is. I think it's at least good. No course is ever perfect. I think that any course you take or any exam you take will at best cover 70% of what you need. But that's a good exam. And I think I can say that here too. They try, but there's so many different cases, so much input, that there's always going to be a 30% that you just have to do yourself. Sometimes 60%, but 70% is pretty good in my view. Now, coming in, design and develop AOT elements. Okay, so you add some new form to a project, right? You configure a data source. Pretty basically on this particular one. Not too difficult. What about extending tables? Yeah, another basic one too. How to extend, how to do things like that. And this has went through a lot of changes too. Some of the extension logic has. A lot of the extension classes, some of the new things that are available. This was an area that really required a lot of customization, I found, when I actually added it to the course, and I actually changed up a lot of things. Extended data types, enumerations, classes and AOT, that's going to be your fundamentals. It doesn't really hit all the AOT though, like the previous exam did. And that's because this one's got much more focus on power, on the Power Platform, than some of the previous ones. Now, the develop and test code, okay, how to do unit tests, some of the attributes, chains of command. Chain of command is actually a very good one, right? Query objects, query builder. So a lot of things in common with 2012, and yet a few new things too, right? I mean, just fundamentals of X++. Reporting is very interesting because in the past they would ignore this. And you notice that you see what's happened is this is not its own exam. This is actually part of the exam. So they've really done a job on making sure that they can really bring in the full-blown picture of what's inside of these exams now. In terms of like, you need to do some reporting. You need to do a little bit of integration. You guys see it's much more general than it was before. And you guys can see over there, modifying reports in finance and operations. And they keep using the term finance and operations, of course, instead, because the name changes have been so frequent that sometimes it takes Microsoft learning a little bit of time to catch up to the regular Dynamics. And now it's, do you call it Dynamics Finance? Do you call it Dynamics Supply Chain? Do you call it Dynamics Finance and Supply Chain? Technically, it's Dynamics Finance, Dynamics 365 Finance, and then a separate product, Dynamics 365 Supply Chain. Right now, that mainly means licensing, but, marketing, but that's what's there. And data solutions over here, doing some data integrations, things like that. It touches at a high level. So you see, probably I'd say that on this particular scoping, you see data entities, you see things like that. I would say that one of the biggest things, OData, it's going to have the BYOD versus entity for performance. That's something that's pretty big. I think that one of the biggest things in this particular exam, if you just had to ask me, is that it really has a good scope of almost everything. It's not necessarily deep in anything, but it covers everything. Whereas the last ones would typically cover far less on the topics and really go more into just delving into traditional X++. Whereas this one's recognizing the role of a developer and being able to have multiple different, specifications. Now, security and optimized performance, again, being able to get security, being able to understand it. This, to me, is probably one of the easier components of most of the exams whenever it comes out. I won't say anything about this one, but usually, because, a lot easier. Interface performance, very important. Microsoft's put a big emphasis on performance really in this exam, and I think that's extremely important. In the past, they would ignore it almost, not completely. They do caching and stuff, but this time, I feel like they did a really good job of gathering the topics. Audience profile, you guys can understand what's going to be necessary. What are your skills measured? And I think, well, actually, that's a new update afterwards. So that's just after May the 22nd. It's still relatively the same, but if you go back and you'll check, you'll see some things like, for example, you don't need to create overlayer models anymore. You can't anyway. With an exam, there's a big challenge people don't understand, and that is being able to keep an exam up to date. Even a course up to date, like I said, is a big challenge. And you see Microsoft here too, so a lot of times there'll be a lot of changes that'll come out, but then afterwards, someone's got to go make those changes. And that's someone that you're paying to make those changes, normally. And so if you just have someone sit there and watch it all day, that's pretty much a bad usage of time. But if you have someone check it every month, every 2 months, every 3 months, something like that goes that way. I know in mine, we have every 2 weeks, but we're also, have a very limited spec of courses. And that's the reason why we could do that. If it was as large as Microsoft, we couldn't do it. Describing capabilities of the electronic reporting tool. Amazingly, this tool just keeps coming up and up and up in its usage, so that's very good. Some of the BYOD, some of the create and revise a Dynamics workspace, so extremely good on this part. You guys can see over there was Power, what used to be called Microsoft Flow, now it's Power Automate, so you want to make sure that you understand that too. And when you're all, if you're all finished, you can take the MB500 T00 course. That's the actual Microsoft official course that covers everything. It's just that, like I said, watch out for the special considerations. Are there labs? Are licenses paid? Can you see a demonstration first to be able to ascertain the quality? Check the instructor's credentials to make sure that they've been teaching, because on all these Dynamics courses, it's such a challenge because they're so integrated. And then you're ready to take it. I think the big thing I personally look for, and I think Microsoft's the same way, from talking to them, they care that people who take this and pass it actually can do the work. And I've written a lot of add-ons onto that part because of that reason. I've added a lot to it, but I do believe that that's the most critical thing. And I think that if someone is to study these things, they can get it. Now, if you can't afford a course, say you can't afford a course like that, and say that you've studied the first initial materials, but you still need more and more and more, then what you do is take each of these topics and Google it. That's it. Identify how to cache, like how to cache in Dynamics 365, like this. Let's say we don't know how to cache. Just come in, and I always recommend this. Go to Google right there. In Dynamics 365, and if you always put finance, finance means finance and operations or finance and supply chain, right? Right now, that's the easiest way to be able to get it because that's been the most consistent part of the names. And you see over here, you get plenty of Google links. And that really gives you the big advantage, because now you can come in and you can actually see that, look at that. There's Google link right there, Google link right over there. And you can see over here, look at that. How to go ahead and get the caching for workspaces, things like that, where Microsoft will write ways that you can do things like this. And that's what I recommend you do. Go through every single objective if you can't, afford one of the courses that covers it or something like that, and just simply Google one of these topics and make sure that you cover what Microsoft has in here, or that you've at least selected. I mean, this is documentation written by Microsoft. It's going to favor heavily. It doesn't guarantee, like I said, the person who wrote this documentation most likely didn't write the exam. It's not the way that it works. But it does at least guarantee that you can go through and take a look. And many times you'll find interesting tutorials, things like that. So very, very helpful to be able to get. And so keep that in mind. Microsoft has a trial of Dynamics that you can go ahead and sign up for. And then you can download one of the sample machines and you can get to practicing on your own. If you have any questions, definitely take a look. If you need it all set up and everything, yes, that's a course. where that all gets set up. Like for example, I set it all up in advance, and it all works, or my staff does too. So I hope that helps, and that really does get it. Now, that should be it. Hope that's very, very helpful. The MB500, I hope everybody passes and is able to get it and become certified Dynamics developer. It's definitely a very nice credential to have, and also a very nice part of someone's career. We'll be having more tutorials like this too, where I'll start to give out a lot more about some of the learning tips and whatever else to be able to stay with it. But thank you, everyone. And by the way, a lot more technical tutorials coming too as normal. And thank you, everyone. And hey, keep on learning. See you later on.